Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. I'm Brian David Johnson, and this month we have expanded our podcast. We are actually going to have 4 podcasts looking at this month's column, which is all about 6 insights about science fiction prototyping. And those 6 insights come from 6 students. These are students of mine. I teach a class in long-term strategic foresight at the California College of Art in their MBA program in San Francisco, California. And as a part of my class, one of the tools that I put in front of the students, along with scenario planning and the Delphi method and other various tools for foresight, one of the tools that we use is science fiction prototyping. And so what I've done is I've asked each of the different students to come and write a little bit about their experiences, what were their insights in learning about, in using science fiction prototyping. And they each bring their own kind of unique perspective. And so we've broken up my interviews with them into 4 different podcasts. And the first podcast is with Gregory. And I wanted to start off with Gregory because Gregory, who's got an art background, when he came to science fiction prototyping, he had a really, really interesting observation and a really interesting kind of way of thinking about it. And I wanted to ask him about that. So let's listen to my interview with Gregory, and then I'll be right back. Gregory, thanks for joining us on the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast.
Great to be here.
So Gregory, as you were applying science fiction prototyping to the foresight work that you were doing, and you're doing it in multiple different ways, you came up with a really interesting analogy or metaphor that science fiction prototyping was like spelunking. How did you kind of come up with that, and what did you mean by that?
I think we have a lot of information about maps and our land, and when I think of a topographical map of a cave, you have the height and you have width and you have this information about depth, but it's still really unknown. You may have that data and you have all the different aspects of what you might come into interaction with, but you don't really know until you actually put on the gear, have the light, you've got your team, you have objectives, and you start to go discover. And that's what I really felt like this whole entire process. In multiple processes, I was always like, I'm ready to go into the cave, something like out of Plato's cave or something, to go into the great unknown.
Well, I love that idea because science fiction prototyping being science fiction based on science fact, and your analogy to saying you're getting your facts together for writing a science fiction prototype, especially in the work of foresight that we do, you're getting all your facts together to then go into this unknown space to explore things that you wouldn't normally explore, much like spelunking, that you get all your gear together and you go into it. So as you sort of enter that cave, that sort of dark place that you sort of... What is that process like for you? What sort of things have you discovered? What has surprised you about it?
I think what surprised me is that I have a really controlled perspective, or at least I've discovered that about myself, that we carry around our own past and experiences that shade this perspective. But I found permission to really actually look at that stalactite or stalagmite and really think about, like, what was the formation process, how many millions of years, and tie that into my writing to go be more specific, be more detailed, go there. What is that, like, little aspect and feel and touch of that technology that we don't have yet? So it really is about the detail aspect of that human experience that you often don't get. And it's like looking at still lifes in art. Everyone always asks, like, why would you paint a bowl of fruit? But the painter was always wondering about what stage of life was the fruit in? What kind of bowl? Who was the craft person of the bowl? How are you going to place it on the table? I think it's these framing details that science fiction prototyping really releases you as a writer, and for your audience to really latch on to to those experiences.
Yeah, it's really getting into the details, and it gives you the space to kind of find those details. So Gregory, I have to ask you, so as you have come out on the other side of the deep, dark cave, what sort of things did you discover that surprised you?
I think I'm surprised of myself as a writer. It's a very different way of approaching a problem. It's much more creative, and it's much more exploratory. So I think I've just allowed myself, I've given myself permission as a writer, as a foresight practitioner, to say that observation is real, and kind of validate what I was seeing or what I was experiencing or what I was feeling in my research, or to go down that hole and say yes and keep going.
Right.
So I think learning how to apply that in your writing and how the audience is going to pick up on that and what they're going to connect to, I think I'm much more connected to who I'm writing for and who I'm going to present to, much more than I ever have before.
Well, Gregory, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. The work that you're doing is great, and I cannot wait to see what you do in the future. So thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
What I found interesting about Gregory's notion of science fiction prototyping as spelunking is the more you probe that, the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more it works. I mean, we've always talked about going to those dark places, using science fiction prototyping to imagine where things could go wrong and things like that. So being able to look at it in that way I thought was interesting, but also his notion of being able to go deeper, being able to continue to go. And if you've ever been spelunking or talked to anybody who's kind of gone into caves and exploring, is that you can never know everything about the cave, that the cave is always changing and that the characteristics are changing, and so that the more you look, the more you find. And I thought that was a really lovely way of thinking about science fiction prototyping, that you can continue to look and use the process to really kind of go and find out new things. So thank you for joining us this month in the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. Again, if you have any ideas for upcoming columns, or if you have science fiction prototypes that you would like to share, you can always get in touch with me at brian.david.johnson@intel.com, or you can always find me on Twitter. I'm at IntelFuturist. Now remember, we've got 3 other podcasts that will be looking at the 6 insights, so look for those, and we'll talk to you soon.